Treasury Minister James Murray has said the government reserves the right to retaliate against Donald Trump's 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium imports to the US.
And he joins us now. Very good morning to you. Desperate morning for our steel industry. How do you deal with a problem like President Trump and tariffs?
Well, it's very disappointing that the US has imposed these tariffs on steel and aluminium. We're committed to championing open and free trade, and our response is going to be one of pragmatism and to continue negotiating rapidly for an economic agreement with the US with the potential to eliminate additional tariffs, because we know that that is in the best interest of British businesses and the British public. And of course, that negotiation toward an economic agreement with the US comes out of the Prime Minister's trip to Washington last month. The success of that trip was to make the negotiation for the economic agreement get underway. And so we want to make sure we continue with that negotiation now.
Can I just interrupt? We knew this was coming and we failed to stop it. And all you can say is you're disappointed.
No, look, the position we're in is that we are negotiating with the US rapidly towards an economic agreement, and that is the best way to support British businesses to get that economic deal with the US. So we need to respond with cool heads.
The EU's hit back with retaliation. Canada's hit back with retaliation. We're just going to say, oh, we're terribly disappointed about all this and we'll just carry on chatting to you. It just doesn't sound like we're standing up for ourselves. And we knew this was in the pipeline. You have an industry that's worth 400 million in terms of our exports to the United States, and a whole load of steel workers this morning at Talbot in Wales wondering if their jobs are going to get lost.
Well, in terms of supporting steel workers, we are absolutely committed to supporting the industry. We're supporting UK steel industry's application to the Trade Remedies Authority to ask them to look at whether further measures might be necessary to protect UK producers. But I'm also really clear that we're in a different position than other countries. We're in a different position than the EU, for instance. We're in a position where we have this rapid dialogue about securing an economic agreement that came out of the back of the Prime Minister's visit to Washington, D.C. last month.
Just briefly,
and that's the right way to support British businesses.
So we're not retaliating. Our language is staying at disappointed rather than furious, angry, upset. How soon do you think you can get this 25% tax on steel and going from the UK to US lifted?
I'm not going to speculate about when the economic agreement might come to fruition. But
do you have any confidence at all you'll get it
We are negotiating
sorted
rapidly to make sure that that happens. And the only reason why we're having this negotiation about an economic agreement with the US is because of the Prime Minister's approach, because of his cool-headed, pragmatic approach, working closely and productively with the US. And that is in the best interests of British businesses. You know, I mean, UK businesses, steel producers don't want a trade war between the UK and the US. We need to make sure that we take the benefit of the cool-headed, pragmatic approach that we've had so far and continue these negotiations rapidly toward an economic agreement.
The problem is, James Murray, you've got a trade war. You're in the trade war, and at the moment you are under fire. Stock markets are down round the world. You desperately need growth in our economy. And the announcement you're making today is you are going to abolish the payments regulator. How's that going to help?
Well, the abolition of the payment systems regulator is just one example of where we want to make the system simpler for businesses. We want to get rid of unnecessary bureaucracy and make sure that businesses can invest and grow, because we know that economic growth is the way to put more money in people's pockets.
And how's it going to help growth?
Well, at the moment, businesses have been telling us that the landscape with the payment system regulator alongside the FCA and the Bank of England is too complicated. And we know that businesses want simplicity when they're thinking about where to invest and how to grow. We want to back businesses to do that growth, because that is how we put more money in people's pockets, make people better off.
So I read your press release this morning. The headline is Regulator Axed as red tape is slashed to boost growth. Then when you actually read it, it says, today's announcement does not result in any immediate changes to the payment system's regulator's remit or ongoing programme of work. The regulator will continue to have access to its statutory powers, and legislation is passed by Parliament to enact these changes. So it's not being abolished, it's staying. You're going to need primary legislation before it goes. Even then, it's just being merged into another regulator. You're not proposing any changes in the regulatory remit at all. I tell you, this will have absolutely zero impact on economic growth this year and next year. And your press release says it's axed as you slash regulation to boost growth. It's just not true.
The decision that the press release announces is to get rid of the PSR, the Payment Systems Regulator.
It says you're going to boost growth. It says is slashed to boost growth. And then it says it's not being slashed. In fact, it's staying. There's going to be no boost to growth.
Well, look, Ed, you'll remember from your time in government that people make decisions, ministers make decisions, and then we have to get the legislation in place to put those decisions into place.
I tell you what I remember, Minister, which is if you have a press release and you've been put on the TV to talk about it, make sure you read page 2, because page 1 says you've abolished the regulator to boost growth, and page 2 says you've not abolished the regulator. It's staying until you've got primary legislation. Even then, the remit's not changing. It'll have no impact on growth at all. It's just made up.
No, look, I think it's really clear that we have taken the decision to abolish the regulator.
When?
We're going to then make the legislation. We're going to then set out the detail over summer as a result of the consultation about how to implement it. And then we're going to bring forward the legislation to merge its functions where appropriate with the Financial Conduct Authority.
This year?
Well, it depends on when the legislation gets through Parliament. But
so when it says regulator
to
acts to boost growth, it's not axed, and there's no chance of it happening this year, and therefore you're not going to boost growth this year, are you?
No, look, what businesses have been telling us, Ed, is that they want a simpler system. They want us to get rid of the unnecessary bureaucracy when they're engaging with regulators. And in this space in particular, the payment system regulator, it is a real problem for businesses in terms of the complexity. And so we are committing today to getting rid of that regulator, to doing it in a way that will be determined through the consultation over summer and the legislation that comes off the back of that. But this is something which makes it simpler for businesses. We want to back businesses to have a simple way to engage with regulators so that they can invest and grow, because by investing to grow, we can then put more money in people's pockets.
OK, I'm going to ask you about something entirely different, but it is an issue that is exercising our viewers this morning. You will know that yesterday another defendant refused to appear in court to hear victim impact statements and to hear his sentencing directly. Meanwhile, Cheryl Corbell, who is the mother of a 9-year-old girl who was murdered, whose killer also refused to come to court, says that the proposal to add time to someone's sentence, which I believe is currently in the King's Speech, is meaningless, especially for someone with a very long or a whole life term. Would the government consider withdrawing visitation rights? I know this isn't your area, but I'm sure you've been briefed on this morning because it is such a visceral issue for people.
It's such a horrific issue that we're dealing with here in terms of the crimes that were committed, but also to add to how horrific the crimes are, the then emotional and devastating impact of the criminals, of the people who are being prosecuted, then not looking their victims' families in the eyes is just horrific, and we need to change that. And so you mentioned there about the proposal to add time to a criminal's sentence if they refuse to appear in court. That's a backstop. There's a lot more that we want to do ahead of that. You know, what we want to do is change the law to make it absolutely clear that judges can compel, can force defendants to come to court, to look their victims' families in the eyes. We want to make sure that reasonable force can be used to make sure that that happens. And if for any reason there's a technical reason why the defendant can't then appear in court, we want to make sure there are other solutions. So whether that's a video screen so that the criminal has to look at the victim's family's testimonies in the eye, they have to confront it. You know, what we need to get away from here is the idea that criminals, when they're being prosecuted, can avoid that eye-to-eye contact, can avoid, you know, bringing that important moment for victims' families of seeing the criminal in the dock and seeing them, you know, facing justice. And so we will do everything possible to change that, you know, whether that is reasonable force, whether that's video screens in the criminal's cell, you know, whether that's, as you said, a backstop of having extra time added to a sentence. But this would all be put through the new victims bill, which we'll be publishing in the coming months.
OK. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure campaigners will take some heart from those words. The Exchequer Secretary, James Murray.